Long before the internet, fiber-optic cables, and digital bank robberies, the world's wealth was controlled by a single, fragile network of copper wires. In the late 19th century, the telegraph was the absolute cutting edge of human technology. It was the lightning-fast system that allowed stock markets to function, news to travel, and horse racing results to be beamed across the American continent in what felt like real time. For the first time in human history, information had become detached from physical transportation. Whoever controlled the wire controlled the truth. And in the chaotic, smoke-filled underbelly of 1870s New York, a brilliant, disgraced operator realized that if you could control the wire for just 2 minutes, you could own the world. The United States Secret Service, along with the corporate giants of the Western Union Telegraph Company, believed their network was impregnable. The copper lines were strung high on wooden poles, stretching across thousands of miles of wilderness, rivers, and crowded city roofs. The messages were encrypted in Morse code, a complex language of dots and dashes that required years of training to read by ear. The government assumed that no ordinary criminal had the intellectual capacity, let alone the specialized equipment, to intercept an invisible electrical signal mid-air, decode it, alter it, and send it on its way without being caught. But they had completely underestimated the men who built the system. Enter John Campbell. He was not a traditional outlaw. He didn't carry a revolver, and he didn't rob stagecoaches. Campbell was a former chief operator for Western Union, a technological prodigy who understood the physics of electricity better than the men who signed his paychecks. After being fired for his stubborn arrogance, Campbell felt no loyalty to the corporate empire. He looked at the vast network of telegraph lines crisscrossing Manhattan and didn't see a miracle of modern progress. He saw a target. He saw a way to execute the most sophisticated, invisible heist the world had ever witnessed. To understand his plan, we have to look at the massive multi-million-dollar industry of 19th century sports gambling. In the 1870s, pool rooms and betting parlors were scattered across every major American city. Thousands of wealthy businessmen and working-class men alike gathered in these establishments to bet on horse races taking place in distant states, like Maryland or Kentucky. Because there were no radios or telephones, the official results of the races were transmitted exclusively via Western Union telegraph wires. The process was standard. The moment a horse crossed the finish line, an operator at the track tapped out the winning numbers. The signal traveled instantly down the wire to the main pool rooms in New York, where a clerk yelled out the winner, and the bookmakers paid out the cash. The entire system relied on the absolute certainty that the information arriving on the wire was instantaneous and untampered with. John Campbell realized there was a fatal, invisible flaw in this system. The vulnerability wasn't at the racetrack, and it wasn't inside the pool rooms. It was in the lonely, dark spaces between the poles. Campbell spent months quietly recruiting an elite crew of rogue telegraph operators, line repairmen who had been blacklisted by the company, and wealthy shadow investors who could fund his expensive, highly specialized equipment. Together, they formed a secret criminal enterprise that history would later call the Telegraph Syndicate. Their first task was to build a mobile, invisible interception station. Campbell and his men located a quiet, abandoned building in a dingy alleyway in Lower Manhattan. Directly above the roof of this building ran the main trunk line of the Western Union wire that carried the official racing results from the southern tracks straight into the heart of the city's largest gambling syndicates. In the dead of winter, under the cover of a freezing rainstorm, 2 of Campbell's linemen climbed the icy wooden poles. Working in absolute silence, using insulated tools, they sliced open the heavy copper wire. They didn't cut the line entirely, which would have instantly alerted the central office by breaking the electrical circuit. Instead, they spliced a highly covert, microscopic, black wire into the main line, running it down the back of the building and directly through a hidden hole in the window frame of their secret room. Inside that room, John Campbell sat in the dark, a brass telegraph key resting under his fingers, his ears tuned to the metallic clicks of a pocket-sized sounder. The trap was set. The syndicate had successfully inserted a digital dam into the river of global information. The operation worked with terrifying mathematical precision. When a high-stakes race began in Maryland, the official operator at the track tapped out the results as usual. The electrical signal traveled at the speed of light through the wilderness, reached the city limits of New York, and flowed straight down Campbell's hidden black wire. Instead of continuing to the pool rooms, the signal stopped inside the secret room. Campbell sat quietly, listening to the clicks. He wrote down the name of the winning horse on a scrap of paper. Then, he held his breath. He looked at a heavy silver stopwatch resting on the table. He waited. 60 seconds. 90 seconds. 120 seconds. For 2 full minutes, the physical world kept moving, but the information world was completely frozen. In those 120 seconds of artificial silence, Campbell's hidden partners, dressed in expensive tailored suits and top hats, were already standing inside the crowded, chaotic pool rooms downtown. They were waiting for a subtle, prearranged signal from a lookout standing near the window. The moment the clock struck 2 minutes, the lookout adjusted his hat. The syndicate members inside walked calmly up to the betting counter. They laid down massive stacks of genuine cash on the horse that Campbell had already decoded. They were making a bet on a race that had legally and physically ended 2 minutes ago. But to the bookmakers and the rest of the world, the race was still running. The second the bets were locked in, Campbell pressed his own brass key in the secret room. He retransmitted the exact original Morse code signal back out into the main line. The signal traveled the remaining half-mile to the pool room's official receiver. The clerk's eyes widened. He held up his hands and shouted the name of the winning horse. The syndicate members smiled, picked up their massive winnings, and walked out into the rain. It was a perfect, victimless crime. The bookmakers checked their machines. The tape was clean, the Morse code was authentic, and the timing seemed perfect. No one suspected a thing. Within weeks, the Telegraph Syndicate was draining tens of thousands of dollars every single day from the financial reserves of the city's largest betting houses. John Campbell had become the invisible ghost in the machine, manipulating time itself to print wealth out of thin air. But when you start stealing from the most powerful and ruthless gambling kings in New York, the money stops being a scoreboard. It becomes a target on your back. The sudden, massive losses sent shockwaves through the New York gambling underworld. The city's largest bookmakers, who were backed by powerful political machines and ruthless street gangs, knew how to handle cheaters who used marked cards or loaded dice. But this was different. The ledger books showed an impossible anomaly. A small group of gentlemen was consistently making massive, flawless bets on long-shot horses in the final 2 minutes before the results were announced. The odds of such luck were mathematically impossible. The gambling kings realized they weren't being outsmarted by lucky bettors. They were being robbed by an invisible phantom within the technology itself. They put immense pressure on the Western Union Telegraph Company, threatening to pull their multi-million-dollar accounts if the leak wasn't found. In response, Western Union turned to the ultimate authority in counterintelligence and financial security: the United States Secret Service. A special task force of agents was assembled. They knew they weren't chasing ordinary criminals. To catch a thief who operated inside a copper wire, they had to think like engineers. The agents began a systematic, invisible audit of the entire Manhattan grid. They mapped out every inch of the primary telegraph lines, climbing slippery rooftops and tracing wires through dark industrial alleys. At the same time, Western Union engineers began sending secret test currents down the lines. They were looking for a microscopic drop in electrical voltage, a telltale sign that someone had attached a foreign object to the wire to bleed off the signal. For weeks, John Campbell outmaneuvered them. He was a master of his craft. He knew exactly how much resistance to add to his hidden black wire to ensure the central office generators wouldn't detect the diversion. The syndicate operated like a military unit, constantly changing their schedules, skipping certain races, and never staying active in the secret room for more than an hour at a time. But the syndicate's absolute discipline began to erode as the piles of cash grew higher. The shadow investors and the street-level lookouts became greedy. They wanted bigger payouts, and they wanted them faster. Against Campbell's strict warnings, they forced a plan to intercept the biggest event of the year, the Suburban Handicap, a race where millions of dollars across the country hung in the balance. On the afternoon of the big race, the air inside the secret Manhattan room was thick with tension and tobacco smoke. John Campbell sat at his desk, his headset pressed tightly to his ears. Outside, a team of Secret Service agents, accompanied by Western Union linemen carrying specialized electrical meters, was quietly moving from roof to roof along the main line. As the race in Maryland reached its climax, the track operator tapped his key. The signal surged toward New York. Inside the secret room, Campbell caught the impulse, freezing the information. But this time, the massive surge of data on a high-traffic race day caused a slight, unexpected spark at the poorly insulated splice on the roof. A sharp-eyed Western Union lineman standing just 2 blocks away on a neighboring roof saw the tiny blue flash of electricity against the gray Manhattan sky. He pointed his finger and shouted to the agents. The trail was found. While Campbell's partners inside the downtown pool rooms were calmly locking in their final fraudulent bets, the Secret Service was already breaching the abandoned building. They didn't use the stairs. They dropped onto the fire escapes and smashed through the heavy glass windows of the hidden laboratory. The door was kicked open with shattering force. Armed agents flooded the room, guns drawn. John Campbell was caught in midair, his hand still resting on the brass key, the stopwatch ticking on the table. The wires running from the window to the equipment were cut instantly with axes, restoring the live circuit to the city. The agents were absolutely astonished by what they found. The room looked like a government research facility. There were custom batteries, experimental sounders, and complex switching matrices that Western Union hadn't even patented yet. The chief investigator looked at the elaborate setup, then at Campbell, and remarked that it was the greatest mechanical conspiracy in the history of crime. The raid broke the spine of the Telegraph Syndicate. John Campbell and his rogue operators were arrested and subjected to a sensational trial that exposed the extreme vulnerabilities of the modern world's communications. The government was terrified of their technical brilliance. They realized that if Campbell had chosen to intercept political or military messages instead of horse races, he could have altered the course of American history. Campbell was sentenced to a heavy prison term, and Western Union spent millions of dollars completely insulating their lines, introducing primitive forms of signal encryption and placing armed guards on the primary routing hubs. The era of the simple copper wire monopoly was over. John Campbell's brilliant high-tech heist serves as a haunting prologue to the modern digital age. It proved that no matter how advanced, secure, or impenetrable a network appears, the greatest threat will always be the human minds that built it, waiting in the dark to exploit the silent spaces between the seconds.